if you can just go ahead.
Thank you so much, Susan. You don't want the class reps to introduce themselves, Susan, or just maybe a few briefly, then we can proceed.
Sure. Thank you. I will start with the SLDP Nairobi. Class President SLDP Nairobi, kindly you can say hi.
Hi, Susan.
Hello, how are you?
They can only react with deactivated unmute and mute.
So maybe if they can, each class, we have Mombasa, Baringo, Lower Kabete, and Matuga. Maybe one of each of the classes can raise up their hands so that you can be unmuted and say something before we start.
Yes, yeah, that is perfect.
Madam Josephine Wekesa, you can proceed. Kindly unmute.
Good afternoon, each one of us. My name is Josephine Acheno, standing in for the President Baringo campus. Thank you.
We have Mombasa, we have Nairobi, and Matuga. Any of you, please feel free to raise your hand and say something.
Matuga and Baringo class reps, you can just introduce yourself on behalf of the team so that we can start.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
This is Josephine Atieno, the Deputy President, Baringo campus. We appreciate for this webinar, and we believe out of it, a lot shall be learned. Thank you. Enjoy the webinar.
Thank you. Nairobi and Mombasa. Or maybe, sir, if maybe we can continue, and then in the time of questions and interactions, we will give them time to maybe say something.
Yes, I think that is okay in the interest of time.
Thank you.
We can start, then we will give them time at the tail end. Thank you so much, Susan, and the entire class, Matuga, Baringo, Nairobi, and Mombasa, for joining us virtually. As Susan has mentioned, my name is Roy Sasaka Telewa. I am the one who is going to take you through this session. I think it is likely to be one of the most innovative sessions that has been introduced by KSG, the School of Government, just to ensure that there is experience sharing, that we have time to share our experiences, both from the industry, in our areas of profession, and just to challenge each other. I know one of us has said to learn a lot, but majorly I think my session, I'll be more, mine will be to challenge you, because I know by the beginning of this SLDP, you've done a lot of learning. So this session is just to jog our mind that there is something that as strategic leaders and thinkers and captain in the industry, or leaders in our respective departments and so on. So there's something that we all sometimes don't give a lot of emphasis, but it is a key component of strategic leadership. And that is leadership transition. And that's why Sasaka is here to share with you and to jog your minds on this leadership transition. I know when we talk about leadership transition, when you look at the strategist in this class, you may be thinking about how organizations maybe transition, how governments change, administration change from day in, day out. We have a new government, you have a new administration, and therefore, at the grand scheme of things, leadership transition may be alluding to that. Okay, somebody's saying no sound. Susan, can you hear me? Or it's a problem with that particular campus, so that I know whether it is something that is being addressed?
We can hear you clearly. Let me just sort it out. But
So
you are
just
loud and
sort out
clear.
for that particular, so that they're able to listen. So yes, at a strategic, at the greater grand scheme of things, that could be leadership transition. But there's some component of leadership transition that we fail to understand, that is at a personal level, at you as an individual. Is it a perspective you've had to relook at yourself and even appreciate that you are going through transition, you as an individual, and that your transition may not only affect you, but it can also affect the institution, or it can affect the entire government or the entire continent. So do we have a moment where we reflect upon ourselves and keep a keen eye on our leadership transition? And I think that is where we are going to have this talk in the next like 30 or 40, 50 minutes, just to emphasize that there is a component of us that sometimes we don't even realize that it's happening on us. You wake up one day, you are working here, after some components of months, you're working somewhere else or in a different department, but you don't take a time to reflect and ask yourself, was this a strategic move that happened to me? Is it something that was very intentional as the purpose or where I wanted to be? Or it's a reactional thing? And that's why we are going to say that there is, as a strategic leader in this SLDP class, leadership transition is very, very critical. And it's something that you need to have an interest in. So yes, at an organizational level, public institutions serve citizens across successive administrations. We well-managed transitions ensure that service delivery remains uninterrupted and aligned with the national goals and personal perspective. But at a personal level, you need to undertake that. My take for leadership transition is that the more you grow in your career, the more you realize that leadership transition isn't just about changing titles, changing desks, whatever, but it's really a personal journey. It's a personal journey, one that tests how adaptable you are as a leader, how self-aware you are, and more so, how intentional we are. And I know this is a point where most of us may not have been unintentional. Maybe things have been happening to you and you're wondering whether was it intentional? But as a strategic leader, then this is a wake-up call that at some point, as a strategic leader, we need to be cautious about leadership transition. And that's why we are in such a program, that we need as strategic leaders to prepare ourselves for change. What have we learned in terms of leadership transition? Is it something that you wake up and wing your way? I know in terms of political sphere, and I know I can see my colleagues here who we've served together in some other areas, is that some may be a political wing. But in this class, when you're looking at leadership transition, we are saying that it cannot just be it cannot just be a wing, that somebody wing a leadership on your way. Maybe in political arenas that happens more so, but it's in strategic thinking skills emphasize is that it's actually a journey. And it's a journey that you need to understand and be very deliberate and intentional about it. You're going to look at processes. You're going to look at perceptions. You're looking to look at how to manage people in such a case, and also be able to have skills of projection. How have these areas or these skills been able to help you in managing leadership transition? So, and then what about the emotional side of it in terms of managing your transition? So the best part for this session today is just how do we learn, how do we appreciate, and how do we manage leadership transitions? And more so, how do we also manage relationships during such transition? And how do we appreciate that we are actually undergoing what you call a leadership transition, whether it was intentional or it was reactive? Because again, at the end of this class, I will also share with you that some of them you may have no control whatsoever. Some of them happen to you. And as a strategic leader, you're asking yourself then, how do you move beyond where you are so that then you manage the leadership transition in a more effective way that can guarantee success? So at the end of this discussion, colleagues, what I'm looking at is, at the end of this, how do we stay grounded in terms of purpose when we are looking at leadership transition and you becoming clearer in your leadership journey? How do we communicate effectively in terms of our leadership transition? How do we stay curious And this is a very key issue as a leader, as a strategic leader, because sometimes if you don't when you don't consciously remain curious, sometimes you lose track on what is happening around you, and things start happening and you become more reactive than proactive. And then, of course, as you lead, how do we continue remaining to lead with integrity? So at the end of the day, we are looking at what will be our practical takeaways, and it's just my take will be, how are we intentional in building a transition plan? And to start us off, colleagues, there is something that is very profound that challenges me always. There is a paradox that was invented by Harvard Business School. It's called authenticity paradox. So for those of us who are taking notes, and I know this is not a class taking note, but just for research maybe, there's something that you need to go further and check called authenticity paradox. And it's a very, it was invented by, of course, by a philosopher at Harvard Business School. And it has very rich, diverse perspective on leadership transition. Actually, it's very profound. It is talking about how we manage transition as leaders, how we feel sometimes that as leaders, we are inadequate. Actually, when you study more about the paradox, you will realize that it actually highlights a tension many of us feel as leaders in our transition journey. That as we make leadership transitions, we want to be true to ourselves. This is Roy. This is who Roy is. But when we step in the new role, what feels true to ourselves may not be enough to meet the demands of that role. In fact, sticking too tightly to our natural style can hold us back from growing, or it can actually make even the people who are actually the people you're leading start losing the very trust that you need to build in them, because you're holding so much in your true self. And I know I'm going slowly because this is very critical. This is actually summarizes our perspective on leadership transition. That, for example, leaders often fall back on familiar habits, like the way you used to do things before, because that is a safe space that you're used to, and you're feeling uncertain, and you don't know even the right decisions to make. So you fall back to your previous habits, and these sometimes may make us as leaders feel fake or inadequate. And this one, sometimes you may see it in leaders, sometimes you may not be able to see it, but transitions require us to stretch new behaviors that may feel uncomfortable, sometimes may feel even fake, for us to realize our full potential as leaders. And this one has been proven, because we were not all born as where you are. It's a move maybe you've grown to, you've had a lot of experience towards it, you've had a lot of challenges that have shaped you towards where you are right now. And when you look back, maybe the first day you entered into that office, the first day you entered into that role, for a second, you felt like you are inadequate. And that is what authenticity paradox challenges us when you're managing leadership transition, that for sometimes you may feel inadequate in the role that you are. But the realization that you are feeling inadequate in itself is actually making you look at it from a strategic leadership perspective. I've always shared experiences from my personal journey as I grow up into my leadership journey, that at some point, and I like sharing this because actually this is the essence of this class. At some point, when I was growing into my career, for the longest time, I had been a deputy head of a department. And I realized that, yes, I want to challenge myself further. I want to break the glass ceiling, and I feel it's time for me to become the head of department. So because there was already one in my current, the station I was serving, I started applying in other organizations, other government organizations, to see if I can get an opportunity as a head of department. So I applied for many. When you have a lot of time and you're applying and you're being called for interviews and you're getting so many regrets. But fortunate enough, for the sake of this authenticity paradox, there is one that I was shortlisted, a very serious government agency. In fact, one of the top tier, when you look at the categorization of government parastatals. And then, of course, I had to ask for permission from my head of department to be away. But as luck would have it, that day he was also very committed, and we even discussed on a possible date when I will be away. And an interview, rescheduling an interview is not easy, but I was able to convince him that I'm just stepping out to attend to an emergency, then I'm coming back, and then so it will just take like an hour. So colleagues, I was that day, of course, I was suited up. I had my documents ready for going to the interview. So after I saw him stepping out, I waited for a few more minutes, and then I also stepped out to go for the interview. And then fast forward, I enter into I'm received at the reception. I'm ushered into the waiting room, and colleagues shock on me. When I look around the room, the people who are waiting for the same interview, the people who are seated there with the documents suited up. One of the gentlemen who is looking at me is actually my head of department, and he's also waiting for the same interview. So you can imagine, in such a case as a leader, you're asking yourself, first of all, by even the virtue that he's there, seated and waiting for the same interview, and is your team leader, is your head of department for that particular matter, you feel inadequate. And this is very natural. So I felt so inadequate, I felt so undeserving, and I was like, why will these people even shortlist me and shortlist my GM for the same role? Why couldn't they have done a thorough background and realize that this is my boss, and this could have been avoided? The way you ask yourself, could this have been avoided? What other options do you have? And one of the options when I was trying to think on what I should do as I sit down was, should I just pick my documents and leave? And when I was thinking about that, there was a lady there trying to engage me to ask for my documents. So one of the things as a leader, then I thought, should I just wake up and lead? What are the chances that these people will even consider listening to me when my GM is here and they are waiting for the same role? Fast forward on the authenticity paradox, I felt very inadequate. I felt I was very uncertain. I was actually not unsure of what I'm going to say in that interview. But something in me told me to wait on and sit on and actually proceed with it, because the worst has already happened. And when I look back, I think that is very profound for me. I didn't know then what it was, but I think it was very profound. So I sit in, I give in my documents. Fast forward, I enter into the interview room. I meet the board. The board is interviewing me. And for the first time, I had the most relaxed interview, because colleagues, I knew there is no way there is on earth these guys are going to consider me for that role. So I went there telling myself that let me go and learn. Let me take this interview as a learning process. So I was there very relaxed and engaging them, at some point even challenging them in the discussion. And even at some point, I think I cracked a joke and they laughed. So for me, I thought, there's no way these guys will ever consider me. But the way this story unfolds shocked me completely in terms of power of showing up and authenticity paradox, is that 3 weeks later, this organization again calls me for the second interview. And then when I follow, you have to do your due diligence. Why are they calling you for the second interview? You realize that from the 10 candidates, they have actually shortlisted 4. And out of these 4, actually 3, out of these 4, of course, Roy, you are moderator, you are facilitator for this session today. And of course, one of the interviews was an internal candidate. And then one more, I think, from the industry. Then, of course, when you're looking at the 3 people, you're looking at yourself and you're wondering, no, there is no way again. Colleagues, the authenticity paradox will tell you will feel very inadequate. There is no way. They are going to consider an external candidate. I think they have just matched up. They have picked me because I'm the the competition to the internal candidate. And maybe if then not me, then this other guy who has almost like 30 years, almost retiring, 40 years in the industry. But as good news and as fate will have it, after that, they gave me a letter of offer. It was good news, of course, but it was also very hard news for me to go back to my supervisor and tell him that I've actually been considered for the role that we went for the interview together. But when I look at this story and when we look at managing leadership transition, you realize that sometimes as leaders, in most cases, we shoot ourselves short. We critique ourselves so hard than it is required. We underrate ourselves. Even before somebody values and rates who you are, you've already scored yourself a 0. You've already removed yourself from the equation. And this one does not happen only to me. I know it has happened to all of us. Sometimes position falls vacant and they say, okay, so and so, Mercy, take up this role in an acting role. And then you start asking yourself, am I competent enough to lead this role? In some cases, we even tell ourselves a lie that all of us say, most of us say, that let me just be here now as they recruit for somebody so that then I go back to my previous role. So that is what you say that, and that is very profound about authenticity paradox, that as a leader, sometimes you may even feel a fake. When I was interacting with the board, I knew there is no way. So for a second, even I was doing that interview, feeling like a fake, like out of all those 10 people, I am the least person that they could consider. And when I was even looking at my age and looking at some of my colleagues, I shot myself short. I was like, no, this is not happening. So as leaders, as we manage transition, that realization that at some point you may feel inadequate, you may feel fake is very critical. So that when you feel that same feeling at that very moment, you don't go back. You don't go back 2 steps. You don't remove yourself from the equation. You don't fall back. You don't say, okay, no, I'm not interested in this. Why can't you consider so and so? And in most cases, even the person you feel that they are competent, the one that you are rating 100 and rating yourself 0, when they are given that role for the first time, if you were to just have a candid conversation with them, you will realize that they're also feeling so anxious. They're also feeling inadequate. It's only that they're not telling you. So as a strategic leader, also, it is important that when you're going through that very, very moment, you know that it's normal for you to feel inadequate. It's normal for you to feel anxious. It is normal for you to even feel that you're not worth it. You don't deserve that opportunity. In that realization, you will work harder and excel in that very role that you feel you are not ready for or you're not yet ready. And that's why we're talking about transition, because colleagues, I know there are people who have actually left very good opportunities go beyond them because of that feeling of inadequate, because of not understanding that nobody was born a president, nobody was born a minister, nobody was born a PS, neither was anybody born a head of department or even a supervisor. No one. It is something that one day somebody said, okay, today we are why can't you, somebody challenged you and said, why can't you apply for this role? And even you knew you are not competent, you are not, that is you shortchanging yourself, not ready for it. But you realize that along the way, you are there because you took that step. I know for the Christian and the people who are faith-based will tell you, I took a step of faith. But I think for this session, I'm telling us that as leaders, we need to be bold to actually know that that is a moment that we feel as leaders, and we need to realize it. And when you're feeling then, we know that that is actually the power that is in with us to make sure that we can actually excel. So that is authenticity paradox. And actually, when you go further, you realize that there are some leaders who have managed leadership transition in a very bad way, in such a way that they have lost credibility and trust from their team members. You have felt vulnerable, you've gone ahead and exposed the same vulnerabilities to the people that you are leading, the people that are looking upon you. You know, it's like you are a pilot, you're steering a ship or a plane, and you realize that the worst is going to happen. But when you're going through that, the passenger that is behind there does not know. They may have an idea, but they don't know exactly what worst can be. So when you leave it and you manifest it on them, you may see someone jumping out of the plane, and yet you could have actually been able to maneuver that plane and land it safely with no casualties. So and when you look at it, I'm just saying, giving case scenarios where people have maybe resigned from such roles. People have not applied for such roles, and people have said they are not interested. Not that they are not interested, they're interested, but they feel they're not inadequate. So when you look at it in totality, we are looking at how do we let go of our old ways? Maybe in the previous job scenario, the demands were not that much. In the new job scenario, there's much that is expected of you. So how do you let go of your old ways? Maybe you had a bigger team in your previous role, and now you have a leaner team. How do you let go of the old ways to adopt new ways that will be more effective in your leadership journey? How do we step into new expectations? Colleagues, those expectations that you feel you are not ready for, then how do you step into those new expectations and make sure that you actually excel? And of course, how do you adapt to new teams? This is also very critical, because when you're actually adapting to a new team, or when you're forming a new team, I know most of us, when you're doing your SMC and earlier SLDP, you realize that actually adapting to a team or bringing a team together is not that easy. This is people who are looking at you and saying, oh, this is my peer, I'm even better than them. Why would they choose them over me? So when you're stepping in that role already, there is already some negative attitude towards you, your office, and even some questionable demands in terms of the decisions you're going to make. I remember some time back, fast forward, I was looking now, I think I'd served as a GM procurement. Okay, my profession is procurement, but of course with a background of HR. But there's a time now I was looking at scaling high, and because I had become a GM for some time, I wanted to become a CEO. So I started applying again. Colleagues, I think one thing that I believe in sometimes is just challenging the status quo sometimes. It is a very good thing, especially when you're looking at leadership transition. There's some things even where you feel you are not inadequate, you still challenge the status quo. You may realize that you're the most competent and just the person they were looking for. So fast forward, I think I was applying some of these CEO roles from one organization to another, getting regrets, others calling me for an interview, others giving me a regret. But there's one particular one that I was successful. That is, by then it was the National Youth Council. And then I go through the interview, I am successful. I joined the institution, and then I'm having my first management meeting in the boardroom. You know, the way you're prepared yourself on the talking notes, on how you're going to clarify your vision, how you're going to tell them about. And when you enter into that meeting room and you meet your colleagues, and these are the management team, and they're looking at you, and one of them had even been acting in that particular role as the acting CEO for over 13 years. And first of all, fast forward, he was very annoyed that he had not been selected, and he felt like that was even very unfair on him. And then you realize in the very first meeting, you are after you've given your remarks and you have shared your vision, somebody tells you, CEO, I think that is very ambitious. I know you are the age of my son. And I've been here, I've been leading this institution for the last 13 years. And I think what you're proposing cannot work. I think get time, sit in your desk, go through those things, and then you can come for counsel. And this is somebody who is telling you that they are due for retirement, and you're wondering, for a second, you're even sweating in your nice suit that you've worn. You're sweating. You're wondering, hey, how do I now respond to this? What next? And you are there. You're wondering, hey, is this the team I'm going to lead? Was I actually even the right candidate for this? So I think the most important thing where I'm trying to say is that then how do you as a leader step in that new role? How are you going to make sure that these teams you are not buying, you are actually cultivating the trust in this team, and them to look at you and get inspired in your leadership and say, okay, yes, this is actually the right leader that this institution required. And this may take time, colleagues. It may take months, but I think as a leader, staying grounded and knowing that those are some of the challenges you're going to go through is something that will actually ensure that you are able to focus on building teams. Let me not go so much into that. And of course, managing emotions of the team that you're leading, and of course, building confidence over time. Building confidence over time is very critical. If just for an easy way, even just looking at low-hanging fruits, what are the quickest wins that you want to win as a team, so that your team can see that there is new leadership in space. Because again, you can't just wish for trust, building trust over time if you're not doing it. What are some of the initiatives you're putting in place to build this, to cultivate this? What kind of the low-hanging fruits are you going to target as a leader, so that then they're outstanding? They will shape your leadership journey. So I think building confidence over time is very, very critical, and something that we as a team, as a strategic thinkers in this class, needs to be very keen on, that exactly where the authenticity paradox shows up. When transitioning into a new leadership role, it is natural to want to show up as your true self, but your old self may not yet handle the skills, confidence, communication styles, strategic posture the new role will require. So leaders often struggle during transitions because they cling to old rigid sense of identity. You want to cling to it. This is just who I am. Those are some of the myths we tell ourselves. This is just who I am. You either work with me the way I am, or you shape out. Instead of experimenting with the new ways of leading and influencing and actually cultivating trust amongst the team. So in those moments when you feel unsure and you try something new, even if it fails unnatural, colleagues, that is why I'm here to remind you that that's not being fake. That is actually part of evolving into your next leadership identity. That is leadership transition. So when you feel that, just know that you are actually growing into your leadership journey. And it's everywhere. I know a very good friend of mine, who is considering a political seat. And for a second, he challenged me and told me, hey, this thing, you can go for it. Why haven't you ever thought about it? You can go and vie, and you really know you have a good way to talk to people, and you have a good grassroots mobilization. Why don't you try? But I think when I have a conversation with him again, I'll remind him that as much as I'm talking about authenticity paradox, I think I'm still there where I feel that maybe there's somebody else who is a better politician than me. But after this class, colleagues, I think maybe I'll have to relook at this paradox myself. So why leadership transitions? Why leadership transitions? Yes, I mentioned in the beginning that there are two ways to look at this. There are those leadership transitions that will happen to you whether you like it or not. And there are those that you need to be intentional and proactive and plan and have a plan and in place. So let's talk about those ones that you have no control, maybe at just a high level, so that we appreciate the real technicalities of how life is. In some year back, I had gotten to be that job. I told you that I was very happy to have been appointed as a GM. And I was thanking God, and I was moving around, and I was very confident of myself. And I was looking at myself and saying, this is the epitome of achievement. I've achieved so much at an early age, and I was feeling so proud of myself. And I was thanking my God for it. But fast forward, before I continued celebrating, one morning, I think it was a very sad morning, I wake up to the news. By then, it was His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, Muigai Kenyatta, announcing in the news that all heads of procurement, colleagues, I've worked so hard to be a head of procurement. Now I am a GM procurement. And then they are telling me that all heads of procurement should proceed. In fact, with our counterparts, finance, it was head of procurement and our counterparts, finance, should proceed on compulsory leave. And remember, I had moved from a contract job when I was going to this GM, from a contract, from a pensionable, permanent and pensionable, to a contract position, and you're just looking at your success. A degree has been issued that you need to proceed on contract on a compulsory leave, and that now you hand over your roles. And you're wondering, was this a blessing or it was a curse? What is this? Now, this is a situation that I had never anticipated. If you had asked me when I was signing up my contract, I was very optimistic that as much as I'm going into contract, I'm going to work very well. So I think where I was just trying to tell you that on the reactive and possible transition that you may not be aware. I think to summarize, it is that yes, you are looking at your career, you're achieving, but one day you're waking up, you have no career, you are on compulsory leave. Something that was supposed to take 2 weeks is taking 1 month, is taking months, and you're still at home. Fast forward, my contract comes to an end at the time when I thought it will be renewed. But the CEO and the board comes to me and tell me, during this period, I think we don't feel okay to renew it. I think what we are requesting is that you proceed and conclude the whatever the clearance that has been given. Then when you come back, we'll renew. So for a second part, you're coming from PNP, you're going to contract, and then you're transitioning very fast to unemployed without even knowing that that is where you're headed to. And this happens to all of us. You know, sometimes when we hear this, sometimes we don't bring it closer home to feel like this is things that can happen to us. We've seen cases where there are changes in government policy and parastatals are being merged. In worst case scenario, we've seen parastatals being wound up, and you realize that you are doing so well. But on a flip, when you wake up one morning, you are in a place that you didn't see yourself going. And we've even seen other parastatals, maybe retrenchment coming. So when you look at this as a strategic leader, you realize that there are some leadership transition decisions that are beyond us, that will happen to you whether you like it or not. Sometimes, I'm not saying it will happen to all of us. Sometimes a few of us go through so that we are a case study to share the worst case scenarios, the lessons, so that then you take the best case scenarios and you leave the worst for those of us who have gone through the experience. And then you ask yourself, is this actually, when you look at yourself, you ask yourself, what kind of fate is this? And some points, we've had even some of our colleagues go into depression, worst case scenarios. We've had people even commit suicide because you are living for the moment. You are living knowing that your life is set. You've actually taken off. And then something happens. And then you realize that you are in a place where you didn't envision yourself being. And the essence of this leadership transition is not to tell you that that cannot happen to you or not to scare you because you are a strategic leader. Mine is just to tell you that, yes, as a strategic leader, is just realization that can happen to you will enable you make some strategic decisions to maneuver in the worst case scenario that happens, or if that is the essence of how to manage the reactive one. I may not go so much into it in the interest of time, but just the realization that that is also a transition. We've seen also governments change. A government comes in and you're doing so well, and maybe the position you're holding is a political position. And therefore, you know by default, you have to let go or you have to take another career journey. But those are things that we need to be aware as strategic leaders, that these are things that happen in our environment. These are things that happen to us. And these are things that we need to be aware, conscious of, and work to. So then there is also leadership transition that we work towards, very proactive. We have even a plan in place that from here, this is where I want to be. In the next 10 years, this is where I want to be. In the next 20 years, God willing, this is where I want to be. So those ones are what we call proactive. And I also want to mention something about it because that's why we're here. For the proactive ones, I think the most profound question is, where do you want to be in the next a number of years, of course. And I'm sure some of the classes that you've gone through have also prepared you as a strategic leader. How do you build your brand in such a way that it can sustain through the period of transition you're looking at, through the projections that you're looking at? How do you build such a strong brand? And I've seen, even in our professional life, that we have changes that have happened in the industry. Maybe you're an accountant, you're an HR professional, you're a procurement professional, and at some point, you didn't plan for this change to happen, and therefore you are getting off guard. You are being reactive in something that you should have been proactive. For HR people who are here, you've seen the introduction of licenses for HR practitioners. For procurement professionals, you've seen in 2015 where it was a requirement that in the application of the new standard procurement law, you needed to have what you call a practicing license for you as the head of department or the head of the function to offer professional opinion. So by that time, if you had not worked on building, if you did not worked on building your brand to be so strong to withstand time or to be futuristic, you realize that instead of being proactive, you are now being reactive. So I think in managing such leadership transition, my take will be that we need to relook at our brand now in the most immediate future and the near future. See, what is it that you are very strong at now? What is required of you now? And what is required of you in future? Like, for instance, in the profession, those people who had not envisioned that they needed to undergo the professional procurement course and they needed to undertake that license, they realized that some of them were getting out of job. Actually, most of my colleagues lost their work. Some of them were required to be submitting their professional opinion through their juniors, because maybe you realize that your junior has this the license you don't have. And I even remember at some case, you now recommend some of the and it's something that as a strategic leader, you should have envisioned that this is where I am in my profession. This is likely where the profession is going, and this is what I need to do now to build my brand to withstand the immediate and the future. So that is very critical as a strategic leader in managing transition. And it can be as simple as being in this class SLDP. You've seen some of our colleagues, it is time for promotion, and they tell them, unfortunately, the Muhammarak has looked at your file, and unfortunately, SLDP is missing. If that certificate was here, we could actually have given you that role right now. And you look at yourself, you're like, oh, I have just 1 year or 2 years to retire. So do I go back and do SLDP, or I just let it go? So I think when we are not strategic, when we don't guard our brand, when we are not so selfish about our brand, sometimes we are overtaken by events, we are overtaken by time, and we start playing reactive decisions that should have been very done in an easy way. I remember a time when in my career, I applied to do SLDP, and I think this one for me, it challenges me. And I got admitted at Kenya School of Government some years back, and I went to my employer and I requested to be funded because I was entitled to. There was that funding and maybe, I don't know, DSA for the training. But when it went to the meeting, the team looked at it and said, no. At the level you were, you don't qualify for SLDP. What you qualify is an SMC or supervisory. I think there is another one called supervisory. And because you've not done supervisory, I think the best thing is that we can recommend you for supervisory. You go do it. And then after 2 years or 3 years, you come back, we'll give you SMC. Then after 3 years, you come back, we'll give you SLDP. So I said yes, because now that is a decision that I was not in the room to make and I had no powers over it. But after I've done, what I did is that I took time off from, of course, I took leave days and I funded myself and I actually went and did the SLDP. After, of course, having done the SMC. But when I look forward immediately, when I was now looking at my career projections and all that SLDP actually came highly in time for me to make my career moves going forward. So it may be as it may look simple or simplistic in nature. And sometimes we've had even our colleagues from private sector attending these sessions, and somebody's wondering, you are from private sector, why are you investing in undertaking such a course? But the essence of realizing that you need to build on your brand and be selfish about building your brand, investing in your brand, is actually the soul and foundation of actually investing in managing your leadership transition. Is very critical. And of course, it can go further to doing maybe professional courses in your industry, or even just diversifying and doing something else that you feel you need to have those competent skills in. And therefore, that covers the idea of proactive, having a leadership transition plan in place. It may be in your mind, it may be written. I know most of us don't have such plans written. It doesn't have to be written. If you are conscious in your mind that this is something that you get time to think about and plan about around it, that is as good as having a leadership transition plan in place. So colleagues, if you don't have such, my challenge today after this session is that can you create time and look and invest and develop your leadership transition plan? It doesn't mean that you're going to move from one office to another. It doesn't mean that you need it, but it will help you build and invest in your brand to make sure that your brand withstands today and tomorrow. So who am I in this new space? What version of myself do people expect right now? And of course, in future, and how do I stay true to myself while learning new behaviors and while putting this plan, plans in place? So generally, I think when you look at those key considerations, that is what makes leadership transition very, very critical for us. Whether it is reactive, whether it is proactive, it's upon you to choose which one do you want. But whether but I think the realization that you need to think about it is also very key investment in your leadership journey. So, and then of course, just some things to look at when you're looking at your leadership transition is, what is the purpose of this transition? I know that is something that, because I've said that as a leader, you may create time to go and look at putting that plan in place. So look at what is it, what is changing and why? What outcomes do I need? What must be lost during this shift? What do I need to do now? What do I need to do tomorrow? They're as simple and as basic and as foundational as that. It will actually challenge you to actually come up with a better plan. What kind of stakeholders do I have that impact some of the decisions that I make? Because when you're looking at leadership transition, sometimes if you don't focus on the stakeholders, and this one sometimes, looking at my leadership transition, I've also paid a very heavy price, not understanding and keeping a key interest in stakeholders. So as a leader, who are your stakeholders and how is your transition, who will be most affected by your transition, whether it's your staff, whether it's the board, whether it's the citizenry, what is the expectations, what are their fears, what are their fears? And sometimes you've seen people come into new leadership roles. They are doing very well, but because some stakeholders somewhere have some reservations and fears, you realize that they become now most of the key impediments and challenges for this leader to even excel. And they pose a threat instead of an opportunity for this leader to excel. What kind of communication do I need to be effective in? What people need to hear this information? I think those are just some of the things that we need to relook at when you are aligning our leadership transition plans in place. So just to summarize, is that we need to clarify your leadership identity. What kind of a leader you want to be identified with? You need to define your transition. You need to map up your stakeholders. You need to have a proper communication, and you need to have what you call a structured plan in place to achieve the same. And then allow me just to mention, as I wind up, because part of this is also just to share my experiences, is that there are three key areas for me, if I was to summarize all these talks that I'm talking about as a strategic leader, that you need to focus when you're looking at leadership transition. One of it is the courage. I know courage looks very, very foundational. The courage to go for leadership position. And I've challenged you from wherever that we need to have the courage, whether it's in an acting role, whether it is political, although that one I'm still marshalling my energy because I've been challenged. Whatever role it is that you want, as long as it's a leadership role, as leaders from this, having learned about authenticity paradox, we need to have to have the courage to go for leadership positions. And sometimes I've told you and I've reminded you may feel inadequate, but that should not deny you the opportunity to go for it. And I've also reminded you that in some cases you will fail. You know, that is also part of the things that we don't talk about as leaders, because there's some initiatives we put in place that have failed terribly. There are some leadership roles that we've gone for and we failed terribly. Just the fact that we failed should not define who we are. I was just telling you that fast forward, even after having concluded my tenure as the CEO of National Youth Council, and you know, I was privileged because at National Youth Council, the requirement then was that as a CEO, and I think that is the dynamics, understanding the industry dynamics, you must have had been before the age of 35. So that one, and I was already in top management. I was below the age of 35. I had already masters. I had already those years of experience. So I was actually the most competent candidate. I lacked the 40 years of experience that my colleagues had. So that was an advantage, an added, not an added advantage, but a comparative advantage and edge on me. But now, fast forward, I finished my term as I'm finishing my term as the CEO of National Youth Council, because again, the requirement as you turn 35, you exit by default. You either serve a term of 5 years or exit at the age of 35, whichever comes earlier. So I'm almost exiting, and I'm wondering, hey, this government now, where am I going to get a CEO role? Should I go and apply back to become a GM in my profession as procurement, or I should apply the position of a CEO? So I think that was a very hard decision to make again. But I told myself that I should have the courage for leadership. So I applied so many CEO roles. And colleagues, I want to tell you that I received so many regrets. In fact, I think my email almost was filled. I had to apply a new one. And I get so many regrets. And I think that is the purpose of leadership transition, that as we have the courage for leadership positions, we should also know that we will fail or we'll have those regrets. But in public service, leadership vacancies are rarely neutral. They neutral events. They are inflection points. Institutions either renew themselves or so courage at executive level is not a bravado. It's a requirement that we need to have it. We have to have that willingness to go for leadership role. So the decision to pursue senior leadership, colleagues, is not simply career advancement. It is a judgment about responsibility. When capable officers withdraw from such courage, then you leave other incompetent people to hold that office, and it is not good for a country. So senior leaders must confront a difficult truth. Either you want comfort that can be about maintaining the status quo and complicity, or challenging it. But as I say, we need to have courage for leadership. Two, fundamental focus for us as leaders is we need to understand at some point that we will leading through crisis and political interference, especially in your leadership role, is something that you cannot run away. It is something that we all go through. Crisis is the real audit of executive leadership. That when you go through crisis, it is not a test of your capability. It is actually a challenge to your leadership. Because I've also seen when people are managing transitions, you are faced with new challenges, with a new environment. In most cases, you had no prior experience about, and these ones brings about panic. It brings about anxiety. It brings about that feeling of and self-worth, and you can even start thinking that you are incompetent or incapable of. But I think the most important thing is to realize that as leaders, especially in leadership roles, crisis is something that we cannot do away with. And in environments marked by political signaling, governments, disputes, executive interference, public scrutiny, authority can be contested, even when legitimacy remains intact. In such moments, leaders face a defining choice: to escalate, retreat, or stabilize. So the realization that this is something that you need to handle, and it's not something to challenge your capacity, is very, very critical. And therefore, as an executive leader, you need to have emotional containment under provocation, communication, clarity, and also unwavering commitment to the purpose that you are there for. So leaders, I think mine is just to say that when authority is challenged, can you lead without destabilizing the system? And then, of course, the last one that is very, very critical is leading during self-preservation mode. And I don't know, I know we don't talk so much about this, that some things happen at the senior levels of leadership that you really critically need to evaluate and know that is this a storm you want to be at the center, or you want to lead and preserve yourself so that you can also lead tomorrow. And it's not cowardice. You know, you need also to redefine that you're not running away from a problem. You know, there's a friend of mine, and I like sharing these case scenarios. And at a very senior level in government. There was a lot of crisis, and they were offered a decision. And I know this is very informal, and sometimes it may not be a good example to say. But I think because of the things that were happening, they were offered a decision whether to resign no. I think the only option that was on the offer, I think the stakeholders and the people in the place felt like it's time they needed new leadership, and they offered them an opportunity to resign. So when you look at such a case scenario, you're looking at yourself. You are at the executive level, and you're looking at the decisions ahead of you. Should you resign as per the wills of the stakeholders, or should you sit back and fight? And some points it may not be clear as that. But I think what I'm trying to say is that as leaders, especially as you grow into your leadership level, you will lead and encounter environments which bring about uncertainty and consciousness in terms of shifts from mission-driven leadership to position-driven leadership. And self-preservation is very human. But when it begins to influence your strategic decision, I think the most important thing that you need to ask yourself as a strategic leader is, what kind of decision-making are you going to do? Is it going to be delayed decisions? Is it going to be over centralized control, or it's going to be heightened suspicion? You know, it may be, the environment may be so toxic until you even start fearing your own shadow. But I think the danger is not over misconduct. The danger is actually being able as a leader to know that there are moments in leadership that you need to go into a self-preservation mode for you to be able to survive that, to lead tomorrow. I don't know the case. The cases may be very different from each one of us, but I think mine is just to tell us that that if your role ended tomorrow, I think the most important thing is that leadership under self-preservation is not about eliminating risk. It is about ensuring that insecurities does not become a strategy as a leader. So I think to summarize it, all colleagues and leaders and strategic leaders in this program, is that as leaders, we need to have the courage, because courage places you in the seat. That courage, colleagues, and I've mentioned that. Without that courage, you will even vacate that seat yourself. But we've seen our peers vacating those seats and running very, very, very fast because they don't have that courage. So courage will place you in that seat. But crisis will test your steadiness in that seat. And trust me, colleague, there will be so many crises as a leader. Let me not tell you that you will have a smooth ride. Anytime as a leader you enter into a strategic leadership or a strategic role or whatever it is, you will go through crisis. But as I've summarized in my remarks, is that you need to lead through crisis, but also understand that self-preservation reveals why you sit in that seat. That you cannot just, the decisions you make will actually reveal why you sit in that seat. So ideally, I think when you're looking at strategic leadership and leadership transition, that is actually why those are the areas that we need to talk about. And those are the areas that we need to keep challenging ourselves. And just to tell you that those are the challenges that we face as leaders. They will not end today. They will continue being there. So the most important thing is that we need to be, as a leader, we need to know what kind of leaders we want to be, appreciate, build our brand, and go and make sure we actually succeed. So in conclusion, there's a quote that I don't know if it's a quote, but I think it's just wording. They say that leadership in public service is not defined by title. I don't know your reflection on that. Because you can have a title and you can be issuing instructions here and there. but it's defined by tension. And that tension is what we are talking about, leadership transition. The tension between ambition and service, the tension between authority and legitimacy, and the tension between survival and legacy. So many leaders rise because they are competent, few endure because they are courageous, but courage is not loud. It's just not defiance. It is not ego. And I've told you, colleagues, that crisis will test your emotional architecture. And that is it. When you're looking at leadership transition, that is all about leadership transition. And just the realization that, sometimes when you're in a leadership role and you see in the news, you always tell yourself, colleagues, and I know you look at Citizen and all these other media, you always tell yourself, hey, that is happening to them. You forget that you are a leader and you are seated in a leadership role. You forget that you can wake up and the next person to be that use is you. So the realization that this is leadership transition and how to go about it, how to plan about it is very critical for our success. So colleagues, that is how I'm going to end our interaction today. And I've had a very fruitful session with you in this leadership transition. And yes, even me where I sit, I've undergone so many leadership transition, and it is something that I really appreciate, and it's very profound to me that it is something as a leader that we need to appreciate and be conscious about. So that is how I will end my session to you. I'll just take a few questions because I know I've taken much more of your time. I'll take maybe 1 or 2 questions, maybe remarks, and then we'll end there. But I believe that you will be better at managing leadership transition, having undergone this interactive session with Sasaka. Asante sana. And over to you. Any questions from the class?
Thank you so much, Mr. Roy. As we wait for the classes to kindly raise your hands if you want to say appreciation or you have any question that you would want to ask. But mostly what I'm seeing on the comment section is the leaders are most eager or would want to know about how to deal with change management. Because you find that some of the officers have stayed in an organization for so long, or they are not ready to accept change. So how would you interact with that as we wait for the participants?
Okay. Yes, I think when you look at a leadership transition, I think the most important thing sometimes that we don't get time as leaders is time to reflect on our career journey or our leadership journey. I think that is something that we live at the moment. We live at the moment. What is happening to us, sometimes we don't take time to reflect on what is happening to us. So most likely is that most leaders, as much as we're strategic leaders, we don't apply the same inward on ourselves. Yes, we come up with very good strategies, we come up with good strategic plans, we come up with very good ideas, but when it comes to our personal reflection, and that is what is critical in terms of leadership transition, we don't magnify or reflect the same enthusiasm in looking at our career journey or our leadership journey. And I think that is why we are in this session. That it is very important as a leader to always take time to reflect on where you are and take time to think on where you're going sometimes. Because when you enter into leadership, you realize that the demands of that role itself keeps you so much on check, keeps you so much engaged, keeps you so much consumed that you don't have time for yourself. And some, in worst case scenarios, even for your family and other things, because you're living for the moment. And it's fulfilling because you'll feel well accomplished, well achieved. And that's why in most cases, worst case scenario, when there are transitions that happen, that they are the reactive ones, the ones that you have no control, we suffer the most as strategic leaders. We suffer the most. And actually, this one, I may not say that I have not had a good share of it. I've also had a good share of it. It's like you didn't anticipate this happening. And when it happens, you didn't have plans in place maneuver. So most of us, actually 99% of us, sorry to say that, now are always in reactive mode. But I think to answer what I'm saying is that we need to create more time and reflections on our leadership journey, and also just try to challenge ourselves. Challenge ourselves in terms of where we are now and where we want to be tomorrow. Because ideally, that's how the world generally is, that one day we'll be born, one day we'll die. And in between death and birth, is that there are things that we need to achieve. There are things that we need to achieve. So it is you to ask yourself, what do you want to achieve between that time? And the unfortunate thing is that you don't know when the other button will be. So what is it that you want to? So when you take time to reflect, you realize that you will start challenging yourself to things that, and sometimes you may not even see that you're growing as a leader. You know, that is another thing in terms of leadership transition. You may not know, but because you are challenging yourself, you are making progress. You may not know. Some people may notice, but you're not notified, noting. But that realization that you're challenging yourself to new ideas, to new opportunities is in itself, and even taking risks. I'm not talking about uncalculated risks, because again, also the environment has become very uncertain. There's some measured risks that you can take as a leader. There's some you let go, you let others who are risk takers to take. But I think we should always work on one, taking time to reflect on where we are in our career and reflect on where we are going, and also investing in our brand. How and where do we need our brand to be? How strong do we want? I think that is very, very critical for me if you're looking at even managing change. Because some people, as you've said, correctly observed, sit in one workstation for many years. It is not a bad thing. You know, when you look at growth, it can be vertical or horizontal. So horizontal growth is also very, very good. But if there is room for you to pursue also vertical growth, there's no harm, because we are saying in this class that we need to grow in our leadership journey. I think that will be, and of course, not forgetting that we really need to focus on building and investing on our brand. And brand, I mean, many aspects that will grow you, mold you into leadership, whether it is your education, whether it's your technical area, whether it is skills that you need added, and all, etc. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much. So I would like to invite Mombasa campus, if you have any comment to say, just raise your hand so that you can be given a go ahead. Or
Susan, and I
any
think
campus.
there is, Susan, as you talk about Mombasa, I think I've seen somebody has actually rejoined to your question, has asked about, what about those ones who have been in the organization for many years? They have been given hopes for promotion, but they just to retain them in the organization for the expertise. I know that happens. And that's why sometimes we say that when you're looking at leadership transition, you need to be sometimes make decisions that are towards building your brand. How are you preparing yourself for the next role? Sometimes we are complacent in staying in the position that we are, but we also forget that we've not taken initiatives to prepare ourselves for the next role. I think that is what sometimes we are so complacent, and I think that is what defined, because promotions opportunities will come, but we realize that some will get, some will not. And when you're looking at growth, is either in the same organization or also across government or across the private sector. So you also need to look at yourself from the same. And then there's somebody who has said, how do you deal with officers who do not want to change and do not appreciate anything good done by the employer? I think, Dominic, that's a very good question. And this one, I believe you're asking now as a leader. Because you're saying, how do you deal with such officers who do not want to change? So I think that is something that you need to do in terms of change management. Because when you're looking at introducing change to an organization or to an individual, I think there are so many aspects that you need to consider. Organization, I think that only okay. To an individual level, most cases, I think what I've seen very effective, especially the workplace, is majorly in terms of a proper mentorship and coaching. Some people refuse change because they don't know the value that that change gives to them. They have not seen or reflected that change happening in other people, or just the fear of unknown. You know, we are human beings. I've mentioned that we all have fears of unknown. So sometimes it's just the fears of unknown. So I think the most important thing that has been effective, especially as a team leader, Dominic, is look at areas of coaching and mentoring and how to influence them through some of the initiatives. In fact, even in terms of what kind of reward strategy can you it doesn't have to be organization as an organizational level, even in task variation to do that. But I think the mostly effective thing is such employees need career mentoring and coaching from you as the team leader, especially to make them have a reflection on why they need that change and maybe how important that change is to them. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm looking for one person from either the campuses, Mombasa, Matuga, Baringo, and Nairobi, to kindly give us a vote of thanks. Just raise your hand and you'll be given access. We are 132 members. So I'm requesting for one leader.
Susan, I think we have a volunteer, Ahmed Malim. Ahmed Malim, you can proceed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Malimu. We are very grateful for the eye-opening discussion. Actually, I call it discussion because we also have our own experiences, and we are adding yours to that experience. And it's good to be exchanging notes. So I see it as if you are contributing towards what we already know and improve it and polish it further. Getting such training is not easy, but we can't pay back Malim Roy, but we are really grateful. And thanks to KSG for organizing all this. We as a teams for this session of SLDP are very, very grateful. We can't pay back, but thank you very much.